Molt bé, bona tarda.
Well, good afternoon or evening, I would say, everyone, and welcome to this new session, Red Green Dialogue, the last dialogue we have in this year, 2021, right at the end of the year. Once again, this is an opportunity to speak about topics that, well, you should please turn off your microphones if you're not speaking. Thank you. This third session, as I said, and this time we wanted to focus on an element that is an approach to next generation funds from a feminist perspective, from a wider perspective, seeing how these European funds, and we could expand this to budgets in general, state or regional budgets, how we link, how we connect aspects that are perceived oftentimes as very economically oriented, and that we have to connect to, as Greens we are, to sustainable elements, which is true. Next generation has to be perceived as, and they're perceived as funds that will support green policies, but also a feminist perspective to see how all this represents. It is a necessary debate, and I believe this was a good opportunity to do so. That's why we have three people that will help us and sketch in this new perspective and shed some light on the topic. On the one hand, we have Dolors Comas. Many of us know she's, amongst many other things, a full professor. She holds the chair of anthropology of Virgili University, and until recently the chairperson of our foundation. We have Laura López, an MP in Madrid for representing Girona, and who will give us a different perspective to seeing how budgets are and net generation funds are being structured. They are starting to arrive in Spain. This may be an interesting perspective from a more pragmatic perspective. And finally, thank you very much, Alexandrra Geese. I don't know if I'm pronouncing your last name correctly. She's an MP, Green MP from Germany. I'd like to thank her. We'd like to thank her for her presence. I think that the three of you will be able to give us a very complementary aspects. I'd like to apologize and excuse Susan Gieser for not being here. She won't be able to make it. She's not feeling very well today. This event is possible thanks to the Green European Foundation. It's part of the cycle of presentations. And the format, the dynamic of this event, well, you know it. We have Dolors, Laura, and Alexandrra, and they will make their respective presentations for some 10-15 minutes each one. And then we will have some questions that we'll receive in the chat, in the Zoom chat, or the chat that we have amongst each other to see that we can speak about your respective interventions. Without further ado, I'd like to say thank you once again. And Dolors, you can start. So you have the floor. Thank you. And you had to turn your microphone. It sounds like we are not fully used to screens. Well, thank you. Thank you for this kind invitation. It's a context that I really feel very comfortable with. I'd feel even better if we were here face to face and we could, see and nearly touch each other, because things change quite a bit. When you asked me to participate in this panel, in this webinar, as now we call it, what Sandra said was, well, you can give us an academic perspective. I don't know if it will be limited to the academia. When I saw all that has to do with the next generation funds, I cannot evaluate equally all the censuses that are observed. I can praise one aspect that has to do with the recuperation plan, transformation, and resilience. We have element 22, which is the attack plan to strengthen policies of equality and inclusion. And in this dimension, we have an aspect that is clearly observed. Well, all the plans should have gender dimensions. This one particularly because when we speak about the economics of care, for example, we have a high presence of women with a situation of either if you take care of someone, you're not being paid because it's part of your family obligations. This is affecting more women than men, but or when we're speaking about caring as a professional, we have jobs that are not correctly paid, badly or very badly paid, I would even say. Even very strong tolerance of irregular work. Let me mention a few things. Because recently, last week actually, I presented in Madrid the results of a research that we were doing in Spain about the impact of COVID-19 in the care of the elderly and dependent people. So we saw what was happening in families, in shelter homes, what happened with workers and with people that were, caregivers actually. We actually presented this study with the support of the Ministry of Social Rights and the Ministry of Equal Rights that knew about our work. And we were very interested to see that when we were using this gender perspective and we are dealing with this, I wanted to speak about it. In fact, now we're speaking about these funds. Funds in one way or another are, overlap with the pandemic, which affected all that has to do with caregiving, caring for the elderly, and but also children, boys and girls in closed schools in some cases. So I wanted to point out a few elements that I will talk about later on. The system of social care, not healthcare, but social care in this case, not healthcare, just to make things clear, related and connected to the situations of dependency or disability. And in these cases, the pandemic actually worsened the situation. Many people died in shelter homes. Just in 1 year, over 30,000 people died in shelter homes for the elderly. This means 40% of COVID deaths in Spain. And in the pandemic made us see things that already existed, but that we were forced to see. Sometimes I use another image. We raised the carpet and we saw what was under it. So things that were there and that we did not want to see, first we were forced to look somewhere else. Well, the pandemic made it very evident. And what we also have next generation here, and one way or another, all these European funds should have a feminist perspective, and in that respect, approach all that has to do with gender gaps existing, not only with respect to salaries, but also with respect to caregiving jobs. So 3 aspects that I wanted to point out. One is that, well, this is something we knew, but with the pandemic, this was more evident. The family is the main pillar in the case of Spain, for example, supplying care to other members. And when we speak about situations of dependency, we could see that lockdown proved this. The closing of services was done considering that families would be accepting the care of children and the elderly that were dependent. But this is not visible. All that happened in the framework of families, well, happened indoors, so speaking. What it meant to, closing they care centers, the decrease or elimination of the service of home care, all that had to do with lockdown, all the community dimension disappeared, and this meant terrible or tremendous efforts for women and terrible situations for mainly for women, but mainly we find women, unpaid women, men are not very involved, taking care of the elderly and children, workers of cleaning ladies sometimes, but that just go for another for just few minutes, and then we have these ladies that have less rights. So first idea here, family as the fundamental pillar. Is this good or bad? Well, not good or bad, or the opposite. I mean, but care is outrageously delivered in families and outrageously offered by women. So care cannot be so uneven. Second issue, care in shelter homes and residences. In the case of Spain, we have Alexandrra Geese that lives in Germany, and we see that the Spanish model is very different. Our model is highly institutionalizing. When a person enters a shelter home, she or he won't decide about his or her life. She or he has to be adapted to the center, not the center adapted to the person. And we in Spain have macro shelter homes that during the pandemic resulted in very negatively, and go against to what we now say. We have to offer a care focused on people. No, people have to adapt to the service, not service to the person. And there's a political and social agreement that this has to be changed. This needs to be changed. The social agreement is that people won't go to shelter homes, and the political well, that's the last resort, and the political agreement means that this cannot go on forever. Third dimension, I talked about it previously, all that has to do with the jobs that have to do with care are highly precarious, highly feminine. 90% of workers are women, and they are paid very low salaries. This is so both for workers in shelter homes. They won't even get 1,000 euros per month. These are very low salaries. And also, we have a lot of precarious part-time and temporary work. The same is for the home caregivers. Hard for them to get full-time jobs, full-time contracts, because they go from one job to the other, and the services are focused on certain times. We have poor workers, and they're women besides. And then we have home workers that will have no right. They don't have the right to be represented by a union or to the collective bargaining. It's more easy to dismiss them. And since they are hired to take care when the person passes away, then they will lose their jobs and they lose their right to unemployment. And if they are working and living in the same home, well, they will be losing their job and their home. This is the sector that suffered probably the greatest. However, everyone suffered, everyone had a hard time. Let me focus now on the pandemic. I have to go on with my presentation in order to talk about the next generation funds, because now we observe changes in this sector. A part of the recuperation and transformation and resilience plan is addressed to modifying the dependence system. I would even dare to say that it has good aspects, but not so good aspects of the other, under my perspective, under a feminist perspective. There is a language, a feminist language here, but I don't see a feminist perspective. Why, you may ask? Well, basically, because the elderly care and dependence, disability care has to be modified. People that do not have a modified, I'm sorry, people do not have their abilities, their full abilities covered, and we have to de-institutionalize, and we have to focus on the person. De-institutionalize means that the shelter homes do not have to disappear, but in the case of Spain, people prefer to get older in their homes, and then we have to support care, community care, all that has to do with services coming from the community. And on the other, we have to have care or person-centered care, because becoming old shouldn't mean that you cannot decide over your life. And people with disabilities have felt it deep inside. People in this range of situations need to decide how to manage their own lives. In our country, the elderly, when they enter a shelter home, they don't have the right to decide about their lives. And therefore, in that respect, people or person-centered care has to be supported. Both dimensions are positive, I think. What is not so positive? What did I miss here? De-institutionalize, meaning that people should stay in their homes, is accompanied by a set of rules, a set of demands that families have to follow. I haven't found anything expressed in this plan in component 22, where it says substantially increasing the services of home care, so that we should have more powerful systems, more power than what we have now, more adapted to the needs of people, that are addressed to the fact that people can stay home, and this should not be because of the sacrifice of women of that family, because what we're doing is taking steps back. So it's not specific enough. However, it's quite clear that we should help home or family caregivers. But from a feminist perspective, this doesn't mean that women should continue doing what they have done for ages without being paid. But there should be a commitment of services that actually contribute to the fact that persons, the elderly persons, can stay home. And well, this is a dimension where people sometimes are more involved in the caregiving to the elderly. But then, if we compare this to the reading and raising of children, it sometimes involves less effort. In the case of the elderly, we find some men that take care of their wives, but just a few. And let me go back to this. We should have another dimension that should be potentiated in these next generation plans, and that is equal gender rights, breaking or bridging the gap in caregiving, because women's lives shouldn't be conditioned by this caregiving at the beginning of their children's lives and at the end of their elderly's lives. So welcome. I'd like to welcome all the funds. I wasn't able to fully examine other dimensions, but I can see that in any case, not very many resources are devoted to component 22. Besides caregiving, it includes violence against women and all that has to do with care to refugees. We need to do more. We need to compare this to other dimensions that are more prioritized under a monetary perspective. Let me now just finish by mentioning that it's very important for the Green European Foundation and And the red and green dimension, and purple, why not? I think that it is crucial to place care in the place it deserves, because we are saying that from a feminist perspective, we need to give it an extra boost. We have to put it right at the core of the system, because taking care of others means thinking about the needs of others. It's a type of evaluation, an alternative thought, an alternative to the neoliberal rationale, which promotes individuality and in solidarity. And therefore, if we want a full transformation of our society, we have to give more and more space to care, because this is a type of activity that requires more value. It seems like we are in a society with reverse values. We need care to sustain life. We just realize this when we have a lack of care, when we're not taking care of others. Then we realize this is happening. But we need an extra support, because it's either associated to the private sphere of life of women, and this is not very valuable, or when it is in the job sphere, this is highly precarious and really not very not very positively evaluated. This is the end of my presentation, but at the same time, I think that this is based on the research we did specifically about how social care is organized on the elderly and highly dependent people, and childhood as well. Well, I don't know if I ran out of time, but in any case, I'll stop here. Thank you. Good, Dolores. Everything was fine. No problem at all. Well, thank you, Laura. Your turn. Well, thank you very much for organizing this very necessary event, not just for the organization, but also for giving me the opportunity of participating. Before I start with, with respect to what I wanted to say as an MP, I would like to thank the intervention made by Dolors and offer two graphic examples of what she just said. Two examples that two people mentioned that worked in primary care and that, well, had many old people under their care. This very well illustrated this this lack of care, this lack of correct care to the elderly. You could see that in the city of Girona, quite young, well, quite easily you could find people taking their dogs for a walk, but they didn't have time to take their parents, father or mother, for a walk. It's very easy to find children's toys stores, but it's difficult to find stores addressed to tools that the elderly can use, such as walkers, clubs, or other things that we will need as we grow older. I would like to point out and remember where we are standing in Spain. If we think that the preparation of our budget should include this gender perspective, to know what impact we should observe, for example, in our budgets, in the state budget, but it's also important to know the situation in different areas. The data seems to show that we are still far from having and reaching an egalitarian society. We still have a long way to go before we reach equal rights. Gender inequality includes the victims of male violence, but also we have, as Dr. Dulo said, in the labor market and the responsibility of jobs as caregivers. The unemployment rate amongst women is 11.1 points below males. I'm sorry, not unemployment, but employment. Figures seem to show that when we design public policies, we have to go towards co-responsibility in the areas of care to others. Traditionally, as Dolors said, there have been allocated to women, and this conditions access of women in the labor market and also in the development of their professional lives. However, having said this, that in the last few years, in the preschool years, we have a better coverage of care. This is one of the goals that European funds seem to include, and for the year 2002, and it has a positive influence in the conciliation of and development of women's lives. But we're not just facing a problem of accessing the labor market among women, but also we still have the glass ceiling paradigm. The average salary of women represents 80% of males' salaries, less women in managerial positions as compared to men in the private positions, and we have less women. And even if in the public spheres things seem to be more egalitarian, we see less women in the decision-making positions. In education, we also have a clear inequality because in mandatory education, well, we seem to have a quite balanced situation. But in universities, we have more women than men. We have a higher rate of school dropout in the post-mandatory amongst men. We also find and we've known that for years, that in the more technical careers, we have more presence of men, and in careers more related to health, we have more women. Here we speak about health not just as a career that you study at the university, or the right that all people should have when having access to healthcare. We see that we still have differences that are intrinsic to the way of life expectancy between men and women, and women live longer than men, and this has an incidence connected to chronic pains and diseases that may require hospitalization or chronic treatment. Seems like this would be a good news that with respect to the use of the internet, digital services, etc., we do not have remarkable differences between men and women. All these data that I just presented to you, then that, as I said, are necessary to understand the reality of Spain in the sphere of equal rights, come from the gender impact report accompanying the general budget of the state for the year 2022. This document is to be presented together with the budget. Well, includes the modification of the final presentation 17.2 of law 11.10 of December of the general budgets. This report gives us an importance of the importance of the different programs that foresee an impact on the elimination of differences or gender differences. These reports that have been prepared for quite a long time, though this year for the first time are mandatory. We'll have a new methodology after. Well, last year we had the 3 R's: reality, representation, and reality. And this year we continue with the same procedure with a small change when compiling data. Last year, data questionnaires passed to the different centers were prepared. This year we include more categories so that quality of the answers is richer, and this allows us to have a wider knowledge of the gender participation in the different programs. This information of impact pertinence has to do with the expenditure of different programs, also with the totality of programs grouped by sectors of budgets, and which are part of the general budget of the state, and also with respect to the totality of the figures. 80% of the 89% of the programs that are part of these state budget includes a gender pertinence, a gender importance, and participation. The state budget for the year 2022 includes 25,000 million euros, even if the transfers of the European Union will be done through the mechanism of transformation resistance, and 773 more million coming from other programs. 97% of these programs and resources have been analyzed as a gender importance. The program of restoration and resilience includes the plan of bridging the gender gap. Practically the totality of the programs that were financed with these funds may have some repercussion on the differences between men and women. One of the goals of this plan is to use the challenge of the recuperation forced by the crisis by COVID to put equal rights in the center of policies, not just as a fact of social justice, but also understanding it transversally for all society, for all policies, so that it can be integrated as a factor of productivity, distributing richness and wealth. Well, there's been a greater impact of COVID amongst women. Dolors also mentioned that, and it's true that we all know that in certain sectors that include more women workers, hotelry, caregiving, homework, all these sectors have been strongly impacted by the crisis of the COVID crisis. Well, we should affect the reduction of the gender inequality in a double way. On the one hand, the design of the administrative procedures that will have to guide this plan, and the other through goals and specific policies that should have a direct effect. In the first instance, administrative procedures, I would like to point out some of these measures. Some of them are being implemented in the regular administrative procedures. Amongst all the programs funded with these resources, we have to include the gender dimension in any data gathering system so that we could make an information analysis to develop indicators to continue observing this program, gathering the possible different behaviors, interests, needs with respect to the effects that well, they could have on health, the environment, between men and women. Another element in the sphere of public hiring, any public contract stemming from these funds should observe transversality of the gender and equal opportunities, and at the same time this different calls of competitive elements that should include requisites to improve a positive effect on the gender impact. Likewise, we foresee that in the collegiate bodies, decision-making bodies, we should include a balanced or parity presence of both men and women. These are some of the measures that we foresee to in next year to having a gender impact. And therefore, we could point out the program of creation of the first cycle of children education, mainly addressed to children between 1 and 5 years of age, all including the social composition, gender impact, and the balance of different territories going towards equal gender and a gender cohesion. We could also underscore the gender perspective, considering the policies of social inclusion, minimum income, national plan digital competences, including programs of different ministries oriented towards the reduction of gender inequalities, improving digital competences. We also heard that digital competences do not seem to have many differences between men and women. We could see consequences in the job access. This intends to have a real impact on women's professional lives and the reduction of inequalities. As you know, we also observe the strengthening and modernization of what we know as social services. In this plan, we expect to have a small measure, a state set of activities, and so that these actions observed in different institutional levels are more easily accessible to people, including women, no matter what their level of knowledge is. We should also point out amongst the measures of the different measures that we will include European funds, poverty, and energy poverty is a phenomenon that we see has a great incidence amongst women that are, heading monoparental families. Programs oriented to the energy rehabilitation, fostering social rent, and the improvement of social environment under a feminist perspective, and the improvement of proximity transport, because some data seem to evidence that women use this type of transports that is socially and territorially cohesion oriented, that will help us save our planet. Just let me finish by point out that 89% of the programs observed by these programs have been cataloged, as I said before, as programs of that are gender oriented. Those that are more relevant are promoted by the Ministry of Equal Rights in the budget for next year. Hopefully next year we'll finally approve them. Well, we include the incorporation of European funds with 17 more million euro. The resources we now have will be greatly addressed to the Spain Protects You Against Gender Violence plan. If all these measures and indicators have an incidence in the reduction of the differences of among genders or between genders, I think that we will clearly see that the intentions are good, the methodology highly contrasted and compared, but we see the three obstacles, many of the measures, so that they have results, that feasible and truly applicable results will require a long time. We are now planting the seeds, but results will come in many years. So they will be effective, but not immediate. This is one of the dangers, is that we have a great knowledge, we have a ministry that believes in equal rights policies, but we still have a long way to go. Feminist movements worked greatly, but when implementing things from the government, there are certain complexities that I fear will allow an immediate effect. And finally, the danger that I believe is more severe, so that all these measures have an effect, a real impact, is the different extreme right positions that are not against the needs, the feminist needs, etc., but actually they negate the gender differences. Therefore, we'll see if with debates like this, we'll be able to create a social approaches, and maybe they will have the desired impact that we all want. Thank you.
Gracias, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. Alexandra, your turn. You have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you very much, especially for having me today. It is very interesting to be able to discuss what is happening in Spain with you, because the Spanish Recovery and Resilience Plan, the national plan, is really considered a little bit a role model in terms of feminist goals. Let me briefly introduce myself. My name is Alexandrra Geese. I'm a German member of the European Parliament, and I mainly specialize in digital matters, but I'm also a member of the Budget Committee. And as such, I've been following Next Generation EU, the big European economic stimulus program, from the beginning. Why have I been doing that? Because during the COVID crisis, I felt very much, when the schools closed and the childcare institutions closed, I really felt what women were going through, because my children are grown up now, and I think somebody is needing translation, needs instructions maybe in the chat. But I've been, a single mother for some time with my children, and I worked at home a lot, so I know what it is to do, a full day of work with having children, taking care of their homework and cooking and doing all that, and I know how hard it is. And I was really struck by the fact that in Germany, just the schools and childcare institutions were closed, and nobody gave any thought to who would be doing the job. They just closed and that was it. And it's, somebody's going to take care of it. And who's going to take care of it? Obviously, the women, as the previous speakers, especially Dolors, explained with many words. So women stayed home, basically, reduced their hours or stopped sleeping, basically, or reduced the sleep to 4 or 5 hours a day in order to take care of their children during daytime, cooking the extra meals, taking care of people who were sick, and then still trying to do their work at night. So that means at a certain point, they started to reduce the working hours when nothing changed. Schools were still closed, and Germany and Italy were the countries, I think, where schools were closed really for an extremely long time. And there was no certainty to whether they would stay open when they reopened. So that was the first point. They started reducing hours. And when you start reducing hours, you are not on the career ladder anymore. That's very clear. Some women just couldn't take it anymore, so they quit. A lot of women work in client-facing sectors, so in sectors where you work not with machines, but with humans, and those humans stayed home in services, restaurants, vacation, Congress organization, therapists, psychologists, and so on. Those were all people who lost their jobs at a certain point. Those who didn't quit started losing their jobs because those sectors just couldn't make it. A lot of women have part-time contracts or temporary contracts. Germany has a pretty high employment rate for women, but that sort of hides the fact that the majority of mothers doesn't work full-time. A full-time working mother of small children is a rarity in Germany. So that means if you work part-time, you are the person in the family making less money. So it's an absolute rational choice in a family that then the woman stays home and not the man. So that was what I was observing. And when it was clear that the COVID crisis was turning into a huge economic crisis, with a few other fellow Greens from Germany, from the European Parliament, we started a huge campaign to have an economic recovery package like Next Generation EU in order to keep Europe together. Because in Germany, we were able, our government is able to just invest and get that investment finance on the financial markets. But for countries like Italy and Spain and France, that is a lot more difficult. So I was very happy when we finally got Next Generation EU, and a lot less happy when I saw what was in it, because the word women in the first proposal made by the European Commission was not even mentioned. It was not there. So the different impact on women and men that the COVID crisis and the ensuing economic crisis had was not considered at all. And we have a female commission president. So that was, my first experience. This is totally crazy, because the people who write these plans are economists, and economists are not taught to consider gender differences and to consider care work, real work. What was more, there was the distribution on different sectors. There are main goals where this money has to be invested, and 37% of Next Generation EU has to go into the green transition. And obviously, as a green politician, I'm very much in favor of that, because the biggest challenge we're having is the climate change, is the climate disaster, and we need to face it. But what does that mean, green transition? Sounds great, but those are three sectors, basically: economic sectors, transport, energy, because you have to move from fossil energy to renewable energies, and buildings, construction, because you have to refurbish buildings. So those are three sectors which are completely male dominated. It goes from, according to countries and specific sectors, from 80 to 95% male employment, not to speak of the managerial level. Then the next, so that's 37%. The next sector you have where the money needs to go, 20% of the Recovery and Resilience Fund, is digital. And digital is another sector. You know, I deal with digital politics, with digital matters, and I know we need to invest in Europe in digital technology, but it's a completely male-dominated sector. Women working in digital technology are really a rare species, basically. You know, 10%, 20%, and really you count the secretaries, but on technical level and managerial level, it's less than 10% the women work there. So we have an economic crisis that hits women, and we have a recovery and resilience package that is targeted at men. You know, so keep in mind those 37 plus 20%, 57% of the money earmarked for male-dominated sectors. No measures whatsoever to get more women in those sectors, because as I think Laura said, it's not that women are less educated, women are actually more educated, but the access barriers to those sectors are so high for women that you need some specific measures in order to increase the share of women of those in those sectors. But there was basically nothing. So what did I do? I started a campaign. The campaign was called Half of It, and it called for giving half of the Recovery and Resilience Fund's Next Generation EU to women. Then people ask me, oh, you know, how are you going to do that? Well, there are different ways to do that. First of all, you need to invest in the care sector as well, where many women work. And where you need more public investment in order to leave women more time to do other kind of work, paid work, basically. And something we want were gender impact assessments. With just gender impact assessment, you do a precise analysis of what the current situation is and how the situation is going to change when you invest that kind of money. And therefore, you can direct the investment in a way that it is gender balanced. So those were the thing, and a series of other measures as well, but I won't keep you half an hour to talk about that. So that was a campaign that was particularly strong in Italy. And it was pretty strong in the European Parliament. So we managed to build a cross-party coalition of women who were interested, who were fighting into this, and some men as well. And we managed to get a very strong parliament's position, because the parliament could take a position on the regulation proposed by the European Commission. And we had a very strong position by the parliament that called for having gender equality as one of the main priorities of the Recovery and Resilience Regulation, and for doing gender impact assessment on all national plans. And that would really have been a game changer, because that means it's not the economists deciding or national governments deciding, where very few women are represented, especially in the economic and financial departments, but it means having gender experts having a look at those plans and suggesting measures on how to improve them. Well, what happened? We lost in trilogue. Trilogue is that complicated procedure where Parliament has to find a compromise with the European Council, where the governments are represented. And you know how it is, 23 out of 27 ministers of financial affairs are men, not women. So that's a men's quota of 85%. Even worse for ministers of economic affairs, 24 out of 27. And that was just deleted. So we ended up with a regulation that says, well, government national plans have to describe how the COVID crisis has affected genders differently, and what the measures in the plans are to tackle that problem. And this is why we have any gender equality measures at all in the plans, because the measures and the goals and so on, all this has to be related. Every chapter has to address how this affects gender equality. This is why we have those chapters at all. And we are seeing some national plans who have quite a lot of measures. Very interested to hear about the Spanish plan, because as I said in the beginning, it's supposed to be a role model. In Italy, in the German plan, there's very little. We're still proceeding at analysis of the plan, but it does take some time. In the Italian plan, there are a few measures, but the scale is just totally insufficient. For example, there is a fund for female entrepreneurship to allow women to fund their own companies, because it's very difficult for women to have access to venture capital, to funding capital when they want to start a new company, a startup. And Italy gets 200 billion euros, you know, out of this package. It's the country that the biggest beneficiary country, then Spain comes after that. And 400 million, not billion, 400 million are going to women who want to start their companies. So the scale is just totally insufficient. And the Italian Ministry of Economic and Financial Affairs has done a gender impact assessment, and it says that not 57%, you know, as I calculated with my very easy way in the beginning, but 80% of European taxpayers' money out of the European Recovery and Resilience Fund goes to male-dominated sectors. You know, and there are no mandatory measures. You know, a company that wants to use those funds does not need to present a plan and how it wants to increase its share of women in technical or managerial level roles, for example. So this is basically European taxpayers' money going to very strongly male-dominated sectors, increasing male employment, increasing male economic powers, and just leaving the women completely behind on a European scale. And this is in spite of all the economic knowledge we have, because we do have studies that say the easiest way to increase growth, especially sustainable growth, in countries where we have an employment gap between women and men, and I think Laura López just said it's 11% in Spain. In Italy, it's a lot higher. In Germany, it's higher. The easiest way to achieve growth is to increase female employment, because you just need to provide some public services for care, to improve public services for care, and give women access to better roles, and female employment will increase. And that's the easiest way to achieve more growth, more sustainable growth, and a better situation for all. The second good reason is that this economic package should achieve the transition of the European economy to being more sustainable. And what we know from all studies is that women make more sustainable choices as political leaders. Sustainability seen as a holistic concept, so ecological, social, and economic sustainability. There's a lot of evidence for that. Women make more sustainable choices as business leaders. Women-led companies manage to reduce the CO2 emissions of their companies quickly. And this sounds crazy, but this is a study that was provided by the European Investment Bank, and they know what they're doing. Companies grow more sustainable when they have women in the lead, and women make more sustainable choices as consumers. So it's absolutely crazy also from an economic point of view, and from wanting a more sustainable and more modern green economic European economy, just not to consider women. What we did get was a monitoring. There's a European scoreboard that was just published a few days ago, and I waged really a huge battle in making sure that at least where it's easily possible, we get the statistics, because one of the most important things in order to start gender budgeting and to measure the impact of measures from a gender point of view is to have the data. So now there is gender sensitive data that needs to be collected in all indicators where you can do a head count. So how many people do you have in training measures? How many people do you have in vocational training? How much money is handed out to single persons? What we don't have is a monitoring where that money goes directly to corporations, to companies. And that's the problem, because they say, well, and a company can't know. But actually, you can know. It's an analysis you can do. It's just more complicated, but there was just no way to get that. So we will have some statistics, some gender sensitive disaggregated statistic on the scoreboard in order to measure really the impact also from a gender point of view, but not all the data we need, because we know that the bulk of the money is not going to go to single people probably, but to companies. I think one of the instruments we still have left at national levels to improve that is gender procurement. Gender procurement is a very interesting instrument because the plans were basically written by national governments, but they may be interesting be implemented by regional or even local authorities or companies. And what they still could do when you have governments that are local or regional governments that are sensitive to this, to implement gender procurement. So when you have a tender, you put gender aspects in the tender description, and you choose a company that has more women on board, or from different points of view, favors and promotes gender equality. And I think this is something we still should do, because if we want this economic stimulus program to become a success in terms of the green and digital transition, but also in terms of the social transition, we need to consider the women, because the women are absolutely the success factor. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, Alexandra.
Thank you so much, Alexandra. Thank you, the three of you. Well, we have some minutes that I would like to use. It's been extremely interesting to hear your contributions. They are highly interesting. We have some questions and some doubts that were generated by your presentations. Well, considering what you would like to add to your previous comments. First, we have the fact that we are speaking about next generation. We are speaking about programs of recuperation that come from the European Union. And here we have a question that we have to ask ourselves. What is the margin that states have, in the case of Spain, regions and municipalities, to intervene in this gender perspective? Because it sounds like the European Commission, the European funds are very close in their perspective, and states don't have a margin of, action so that these programs can be or can include a gender perspective. One complements the other, but European Union requires, demands the fulfillment of indicators, and then states have a role to play in the margin to see how they want to address their funds, because it's very normal to think that we get money from Europe. Since Europe decided on the states to not have a margin of reaction, maybe I would like to hear your comments about that. The other aspect is that here we have a debate that stems from your comments about the fact that ultimately the recuperation, the next generation funds is something that is happening now, but behind we have a debate that has been more structural, that comes from before the next generation, how to redistribute wealth and how to redistribute recuperation. Who's in charge of recuperation before next generation funds would have a different situation that would require a gender perspective. But how do we redistribute recuperation? We have a big struggle between and amongst economic sectors. It's clear, it's evident that the automotive or tourism sectors, well, automotive sector in Spain has been positioned very strongly because it has a very specific way, strongly masculinized sector. So the preference of the car manufacturing strategies are male-oriented, and therefore it's evident. Or tourism, which in Spain, this is a sector, a very important sector, highly precarious, where women do have or do play a very important role. Or the fact that we're speaking about how much funds will be used to, reach the basis of the system of what we consider unfair. This is what we believe. Some of us believe that it would be an opportunity not just to distribute money, but to distribute money prioritizing a paradigm of sustainability, something that we understand is clear. I'm not speaking about what is territorial, but definitely the last comment that I would like you to reflect on is where stays the feminist movement with respect to this. We're speaking about just institutions and governments, but obviously the feminist movement that has had so many successes when placing on the agenda so many points, I'd like to remind you the impact the impact of feminist movement had an impressive impact. Where is the feminist movement, or what should it be? What should it do? Or should we visibilize what it has done in terms of investments, in terms of speaking about gender issues in the European debate, and this opportunity that we have with these funds? Who starts? Maybe we could read it the same order, or any other idea you have in your mind, both Dolores or Laura or Alexandra, whoever wants to start, we can add to this. So break the ice. Dolores, yes, go ahead. Please turn on the microphone. Well, three big topics. On the one hand, the next generation funds will be used differently in each state, in each country, and depending on the different competences of each one of the aspects that are observed in this next generation plan, we will have a more active role of regions and local powers. And the economy of care that I analyzed, this is being now agreed with the different regions in Spain, what the different types of distribution will be. And also we have another element that has to do with the home care. This has to do with city councils, city towns, town councils, I'm sorry. So we have the different levels of the political structures when using these funds after the competences that each area has. In order for me to see, well, for example, Alexandra mentioned how most funds go to highly masculinized sectors. I fully agree. Without having analyzed everything as she did, I agree with her. But if we take a look at what I said before, component number 22, it includes all the reforms on social services, the dependence laws, gender violence, and poverty, and migrants care. This is the component of element number 22. All this, in Spain, we gave 3,500 million euro. This is a component amongst 30, which includes 4% of the budget, a part that very directly impacts women, just receives 4% of the budget. And I pointed out that some elements are okay, but require the feminist perspective. Sometimes we don't even talk about the distribution of caregiving, but we don't talk about the distribution of all this. Sometimes we need to reinforce the public support services to take care of some home caregiving. This distribution is unbalanced in gender terms. This is just one example. And also, where are the feminist movements? Well, we have to understand that at least in Spain, in the case of the Ministry of Equal Rights, we have strong co-creation work using modern language to create a care system that includes the perspective of a feminist movement. I don't see this so obvious when I speak about the reform of the dependence law. I'm sorry, she corrects herself. The reform of the implementation of some indicators of the law on dependence. I am part of what is called the civilian dialogue and the social dialogue panel, which includes the unions and the employers association, and we don't have a feminist movement. I am a feminist, I am there, but I'm the only representative probably. For that reason, includes a feminist language, but we don't have a feminist perspective. We're missing that. But also what's happening from the Ministry of Equal Rights, or they are considering the contributions of the feminist movement. Yes, I think, considering the way they're working. Thank you, Dolores. Laura. Microphone, please. You had to turn on your microphone. Cannot hear you. Okay. I hadn't said anything. I hadn't said anything important. Now I will. I believe that inside the distribution of competences in Spain, we still have some leeway so that some city councils, some regions that want to have an effect on the reductions of imbalances, well, they can use these funds coming from the European Union. They should do that in a way that I believe requires some minimum levels determined by the state. Always gather indicators that allow us to see the different incidents and the effect on both men and women, and the access on these funds should include a positive gender impact. It's not only a matter of getting the different levels of competence to be developed correctly. We should include the gender perspective. Likewise, we have the agreement, the state agreement against gender violence, where municipalities participate, and anything that goes against gender violence should also include coordinated measures. I would like to point out what I just said before. Inside of one of the measures in the Ministry of Equal Rights, also included some information about that. We have the building of map of caregiving. So observing the difficulties that competences are distributed in an uneven way, depending on the different administrations. I believe that this is just a small sample of the commitment of the Ministry of Equal Rights with the change of a paradigm and going to a change in caregiving. How is wealth distributed? How is recuperation distributed? Well, we have to change our paradigm. We have to assemble a new society where we do not think about distributing, but rather we should think about generating welfare after a society focused on care. And finally, the role of the feminist movement. Obviously, as far as I know, I could say that inside the policies developed by the Ministry of Equal Rights, well, things wouldn't exist unless they had the strong participation of the feminist movement, and this should continue. I do not know so much about gender-oriented policies should be improved. We should definitely follow all the measures included on the urban agenda so that cities are more user-friendly. It's under a gender perspective. I don't know if there is a strong participation of feminists, and I'll stop here because we're running late. Thank you. Thank you, Laura. Alexandra, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you so much. First of all, on the role of national governments, I think national governments still have a very strong role, because even within the 20% digital and the 37% for the green transition, you can add a lot of measures that would promote gender equality. And I drew up a catalog of them for the digital sector, which is the one I know best. And I had a catalog of like 10 measures, and very few of them were implemented. And one would be, for example, to have a public venture capital fund for digital startups led by women, because women, as I mentioned before, have a lot of difficulties getting venture capital for starting their own digital companies, because all the people, the managers of venture capital funds are men, and they don't give money to women, especially if they develop products that would benefit women and not men. So that's a very, very easy measure where you can spend a lot of money on, and that will get you a lot of economic growth, a lot of digital development, and also probably more sustainability. And there's a list of them where states, national governments can pick and choose from. The problem is they chose not to do that. But there really is a lot of leeway. And the same thing you can do in the energy sector, but especially in the digital sector. It's so easy to train women within a year to be software engineers. You could say, well, you only give money to companies subject to them hiring 40% women engineers in the next 2 years. That's not impossible. It's absolutely doable. You just do need to want to do it. So really, there is a lot of space for national government, and there's still some space, some leeway for local and regional governments. On a more general note, I mean, we really need to push for having more women in decision-making bodies. As long as you have 23 or 24 out of 27 ministers who are male, there's just no way, you know, they just don't. You know, even politicians live in the world that they personally know. And if they know, you know, their woman, their wife takes care of the children and they solve all these problems, they don't see the rest of the world, and they don't read the feminist research. That's really the problem. They ignore it systematically. I mean, this is McKinsey research and they don't read it. What you can do, so you need to have half of the decision-making places need to be occupied by women. You need to do systematic gender budgeting in order to distribute public funds equally to women and men, because right now public funds are basically going to male-dominated industries and to men, if you analyze it. So you do gender budgeting, you do gender impact assessments, and there's one very important movement now coming from the European Union level, because what we didn't get, or what I didn't get on Next Generation EU, we did get very, very important progress in the multi-annual financial framework, which is basically the 7-year budget of the European Union. And we now have an obligation there for the European Commission to do tracking of the funds with gender disaggregated data, which basically means they have to find out whether the European Commission spends the money of their regular budget on men or on women, specifically for each program. That's not an obligation to shift funds from one program to another or from one measure to another, but it's an obligation to do the tracking. So in a few years' time, we will know where the agricultural money goes, whether to men and to women, or the money from the structural funds. So the Commission has to start with the programs under direct management, so the money they control, direct them. And then they have to roll out this gender tracking to the so-called shared management programs, which is the regional development, which is agriculture, which is really the money that arrives at every single Spanish village, you know, especially where we have a lot of agriculture and especially in the poorer regions. And that's going to be very, very, very interesting, because we're going to see where is this money going. And when if the data says 80% is going to men, I mean, there's a political message there to say, well, let's start shifting, you know, and let's invest in women as well, and not only in men, because we pay taxes as well. We do a lot of the work, most of the work. Every statistic say we work more than men actually as women. One problem I think we need to face is that economics as an academic discipline is hugely male dominated. So economics really as an academic discipline mainly chooses to ignore women. You know, care work, unless it's paid, is not counted for GDP. Which doesn't make sense, absolutely. And that was a completely arbitrary choice that was made at a certain point in time, and you can reverse it. So we need more women in academic economics in order to change our economic theory. And we know that the economic theory we have is not able to face the climate disaster. It's really the economic theory needs to be reformed from many points of view, and especially from a climate point of view, from a sustainability of point of view. This is starting to happen, and we need the gender aspect in there, because then you start seeing, you know, how are we going to consider labor next years? We know that the digital transition will probably, we don't know to what extent, but will change the world of labor. And definitely we will lose the labor need in the middle segment, not really in the really manual segment, because, you know, care work, which is really manual, also some transport work will still be needed. and we will still need highly qualified technical roles, but all the middle management, a lot of the administration work, like in telecoms, insurance companies, and so on, which today is well-paid clerk work, which a lot of women do, will not be needed anymore. And I had the pleasure, or the not pleasure, to be in a very important event with two of the leading global economists. And they said, well, it's not a problem for women because women do the care work and we will have enough care work. So this is how leading economists see the world: women doing the unpaid or badly paid care work, and men working in the technical roles. And this is something that cannot happen because we will not have a cohesive and a socially just society if that happens. So we need a different concept of labor, and we need to pay care work. And that means we need to tax especially digital companies, but all kinds of companies who still manage to make a lot of money more in order to pay for that care work being done. So it's a different definition of what labor is. And then quickly, the last question, the feminist movements. I see that feminist movements in the past years, and I'm not speaking for everybody, but have not been very present and have not been speaking very strongly on the economic injustice that women are facing. I think they've been focusing a lot in the crisis on domestic violence, which was an absolutely important topic. They have been speaking a lot about intersectional feminism, about identity, about sexuality, all very important topics. I'm not saying they're not. But the basic injustice most women, especially in the more developed world today, are facing is economic injustice. We have the rights on paper, but we can't live them because we can't afford to do it. We can't afford our own apartment. And that's a way to face domestic violence as well. Women who have their own apartment, who have their own job, they just leave. So you solve a lot of problems if you really look more strongly at the economic problems. And what I'm seeing is that not everybody, but a large part of the feminist movement still thinks economics is something for men, and especially digital technologies, which entail the risk of increasing the injustice and the gender gap in their nature. Artificial intelligence, but also social networks increase the gender gap right now. And the feminist movements are sort of far away from that. Technology doesn't look much to feminism, doesn't consider the gender aspects, and feminism doesn't consider much the gender, the economic aspects and the technical aspect. This is changing, and there's this very strong digital feminism, but it's still a minority, I think, in the movement, and we need to make it a majority. But I'm hopeful we can do that, and I think this event is really contributing. And thank you so much for listening.
Moltes gràcies a les
Thank
tres.
you so much to the three of you, Dolors, Laura, and Alexandra. Thank you for contributing to our learning, to advancing and progressing in the ultimate goal of our foundations. Well, this event modestly should contribute with the feminist perspective more transversely. Thank you so much for having followed us. We would like to say goodbye to the year 2021. Be good, enjoy, have fun. If you have some 3 days, enjoy. If you don't, enjoy as well. And in the next weeks, New Horizons magazine will have some important information. I hope you enjoy it. And I hope to talk to you and see you very soon. Thank you very much, and happy